It's time for more CONCACAF World Cup qualifying. And we got two really big matches for both the US and Mexico coming up this week. I want to start off with the US so that I have time to talk about them because I'm obviously going to spend some time talking about Mexico, obviously. I watched the entire game against Venezuela a couple of nights ago. Pretty interesting matchup. I honestly thought, and I've said this in the past, I don't think the US always picks the best opponents for these kinds of warm up matches. I know there's the theory out there that the US picks the teams that are most like the teams they're about to face in World Cup qualifying. I don't think Venezuela is like Mexico or Trinidad and Tobago at all in the way they play. Trinidad and Tobago are fast, strong, tall, athletic. Venezuela didn't really pose that threat. They were none of them. I don't think were taller than the U.S. players, not faster than the U.S. players. I wouldn't even say stronger than them, or more athletic. So I'm not really sure if that was the best opponent in order to get a feel for what Trinidad and Tobago might do. Venezuela came out and attacked. They had a lot of positive movement. Got Tim Howard to make a couple of really good saves. One spectacular save, which is what we're used to seeing Tim Howard do. I mean, he's at his age. I mean, it's not even about age. He's still, in my opinion, he's probably still the best keeper out of CONCACAF right now. He's just really good. The U.S. is really gonna miss him when he retires. Once he finally hangs up his gloves, that's a huge gap in the U.S. roster, in my opinion. I think he's phenomenal. But anyway, I don't think Trinidad and Tobago are going to threaten Tim Howard's goal from that kind of position. I mean, that I think that shot was from outside the box, and he needed to like completely airborne horizontal save. It was pretty good. On the other hand, I think Trinidad and Tobago are going to threaten the U.S. goal more on headers because I think that the Trinidadians are taller. Some of them are taller, bigger, maybe stronger, definitely more athletic than the U.S. players, and I think they're going to be more threat on set pieces, which lately the U.S. have been a little suspect on set pieces. You remember Mexico's winning goal against the U.S. Came from a header, from a corner kick, rather. Those are the kinds of things, and I mean, Venezuela's goal was not well defended. I think that's going to be a huge issue, not just in this game against Trinidad, but obviously moving forward. I still think the U.S.'s weakest area is in defense. A lot of U.S. fans love John Brooks and Jeff Cameron. I'm not a U.S. fan, so I can say, I mean, I'm obviously biased in the opposite direction. So, take what I say with a grain of salt. I'm not as enamored by either of them. I don't think they're as good as the U.S. fans seem to think they are. I don't think that the defense is not the U.S. strong point currently. I think just as a group, like if we're dividing the team into defense, midfield, forwards, I think defense is their weakest collective area for the U.S. And I think I think they're going to get tested against Trinidad and Tobago. And that's just my opinion. I very well could be wrong about that. I don't know. But I have a feeling that if we're going to see some goals by TNT, it's going to come from set pieces, it's going to come from corner kicks, it's going to come from crosses in the box, where these giant men are going to be towering over, on average, I would say the TNT team is taller than the U.S. team. I don't think that's. I wouldn't. I don't know. I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I don't know. But I don't think that's a far fetched thing to say. So I don't think Venezuela gave them a very good test in that sense, and I don't think they gave them a very good test um, against what Mexico is going to bring. I don't think Venezuela plays anything like what Mexico plays. Um, so I thought Venezuela was going to be a very poor uh, opponent for these coming up World Cup qualifiers, but Venezuela ended up playing very well, and I think they gave the U.S. a really tough challenge, and that is, I think, it's going to end up being better because even if they don't give you a glimpse of what TNT and Mexico are going to do, I think facing an opponent that gives you a challenge and seeing how your players react to it is better than not. I thought the U.S. was going to steamroll Venezuela, honestly. And that's why I thought, the U.S. always does this. They pick these opponents that are weak and easy to beat, and then the U.S. ends up beating them like 5-0, and then the U.S. media is like, we are really good, and then they get beat by Honduras, or Costa Rica at home. And it's that kind of stuff that I think gives U.S. fans and the media false hope, because the U.S. tends to do this all the time, where they pick opponents for friendlies that are not very good, that are weak, that don't pose a threat, or that don't really give you a taste of what your upcoming opponents are going to do. And I think that's always been a major flaw in the preparation that the U.S. has for big games like this, because the U.S. has to beat TNT. The U.S. let's be fair. If the U.S. is going to get 3 points out of either of these two games, it's going to be against Trinidad and Tobago at home at elevation, because they're training at elevation. They played Venezuela at elevation. Their TNT game is going to be even higher, at higher elevation, and then Mexico's is going to be at the highest elevation of the three. So they're definitely training for that. So Trinidad and Tobago are going to have to play the U.S. at an elevation that they're not used to. There's no mountains on their island country that are remotely as high as what they're going to be playing against the U.S. So, clearly, the U.S. has a huge advantage against Trinidad and Tobago. Not only, even if they were playing on neutral ground and say, Austria. No, I don't know. It doesn't matter. It could be Egypt, Austria, Japan, Australia. It doesn't matter where they play. The U.S. is a better team. The U.S. has better talent, and individually and as a collective, they're a better team. So I think it's safe to say that the U.S. is going to win this game. I have no doubt. I would put money on the U.S. beating Trinidad and Tobago by at least 2 goals. And, like I said, if they're going to get 3 points, if you're telling only one of these games is going to be a win, I would put all my money on the home game. I think it's very unlikely that they get 3 points in Mexico. Regardless of the altitude training or whatever, I just think it's highly unlikely. So if they're going to put all their players, all their cards into one hand and, go for the win in one of those games, you have to think it's going to be against Trinidad and Tobago. So I think that that's what they were doing. That's what they're training for. Their training was to prepare themselves to get all 3 points at Trinidad. It's crucial that they get these 3 points. It's way more important for the U.S. to get these 3 points because they're tied on points right now. They're second to last place on points. They're in fourth place on goal differential, and it's a substantial difference. I think it's I don't remember the exact number, but the U.S. has a sizable goal differential lead over the next team. I think Trinidad and Tobago happens to be one of the weaker teams remaining. I think the U.S. is going to beat them regardless, and I think that they need the win though. But the problem is Trinidad also needs to win. I think they can't afford many more losses before they're completely eliminated. So I think they come out fighting. I think it's going to be a tough game. It's going to be a physical game, but I think it's a game the U.S. wins, and I think they know that they're more likely to get those points. In fact, recently read an article where Bruce Arena saying they're not saving anyone for Mexico. They're going all out against Trinidad and Tobago at home, where they know they're more likely to get the 3 points. Because if they rest some of their players against Trinidad and they happen to not win that game, or worse, lose that game, even though they save some of their best players for the Mexico game, it's highly unlikely they're going to win at Mexico. It's highly unlikely that they're going to beat Mexico the way Mexico's playing. I would not put money on the U.S. currently, right now, the way they played against Croatia the second half and Ireland versus the way the U.S. played a couple nights ago against Venezuela. I would put all my money on Mexico. And it's at home. I mean, unless you're the most optimistic U.S. fan in the world, I don't think very many U.S. fans are thinking you're coming out of Mexico City with 3 points. I don't think you can logically, realistically make that call. But to preview, I mean, I think the U.S. wins at Trinidad, and I think that's where the smart money is. And I mean, I think defensively they're going to have some problems. And I think if we're going to talk about, I mean, that's the weakest area, but I think that the weakest players were definitely Fabian Johnson was terrible. I think he did a really poor job against Venezuela. He gave the ball away multiple times. He got caught. The goal, I wouldn't say it's completely his fault, but he was definitely not doing well. And I would say Michael Bradley. Michael Bradley is not. I think he's a liability for the U.S. midfield. He doesn't do well up front. Like, he's not a good creative player. I'm gonna compare these teams kind of to like what I see in Tottenham. Tottenham have Victor Wanyama and Moussa Dembele, who are the supporting players right behind the front four attacking players. And while Christian Eriksen and Dele Alli can all create, they have, especially Christian Eriksen has great vision and can, string a through pass to Dele Alli or Harry Kane, or a little cross like the kind Dele Alli scored against Chelsea, the 2 exact goals, that kind of thing that Christian Eriksen can do. He does that he's their creator. But they also have Moussa Dembele and Victor Wanyama, who have vision. They take the ball from the other team, they keep possession, and then they distribute. And Michael Bradley, he has that role. He plays a little further back, but he doesn't retain possession. He gives the ball away all the time, and he doesn't have vision. He makes bad passes. He made so many bad passes against Venezuela. He gave the ball away multiple times. Instead of going forward, he would turn around and pass it backwards. Just little things like that really stop the attack. And then up forward, you have Christian Pulisic, who's phenomenal. You give him the ball, he's going to cause problems. Maybe not single-handedly win you a game, although he single-handedly earned the U.S. a draw. But you have to think about the kind of, even if he doesn't create anything, he still causes problems. He'll still make the defenders, bite at the ball, and then he might lay it off, or he might just take on 2 defenders. He might lose the ball, but now the opposing team defense is out of position, or just little things like that. So they have the forward. Like, I think him being where he is a really good thing, because he can be the, air quote, Christian Eriksen of the U.S. national team, but behind him, he doesn't have the support. If he loses the ball or he passes it to someone else and they lose the ball, there's no one behind him to win the ball back. The U.S. was just getting completely outnumbered and outplayed in the midfield. And I don't think the midfield is a weak spot for the U.S. as much as the defense is. But when you're playing 2 forwards, you're automatically going to have 1 midfielder less. And if the U.S. is going to insist on playing with 2 forwards, you're going to have better ball retention and distribution. And Michael Bradley just isn't good enough. That's just my opinion. I'm just watching the U.S. team. I don't have, like I said, one could argue I'm biased in the opposite direction, but I think a lot of players really like Michael. A lot of U.S. fans like Michael Bradley, and he doesn't deserve it. I don't think he is good enough to start in these big games. I think he has shown in previous World Cups and Gold Cups he disappears. He gives the ball away. He's a weak link. And in a midfield like the US plays, where you really need your midfield to keep possession and feed your forwards if you're going to be playing with two strikers, I think he's an enormous liability. And now if you're going to be playing against Trinidad and Tobago and you think you're the favorites and you have an advantage, playing with two strikers, I think they can run the score up. But if you're going to play that way, if they're going to play the way they played against Venezuela in Mexico City against Mexico, they're going to get smashed. Completely smashed. If they can't retain possession, if they can't win the ball back, Michael Bradley doesn't do that. And even when they do win it back, they can't keep the ball, and he can't distribute the ball, and he's playing backwards. I mean, completely annihilation is what I'm expecting. So I think the U.S. is going to end up playing maybe one striker in Mexico. Based on what Bruce Arena said. He said he's not saving anyone for Mexico. He's not resting players. He's going to go all out against Trinidad and Tobago and then see what happens against Mexico. I think that's probably the most intelligent thing for him to do. I think that's the best bet. Like I said, I think that's where the smart money is. And if he's going to do that, I think he has no choice but to play a more conservative game against Mexico in Mexico City. In fact, I predict, and I don't know the U.S. team very well, but I do predict that he's going to end up playing one striker, maybe five midfielders, or maybe even five defenders, and just kind of play on the counterattack, which the U.S. in the past has done to great effect against Mexico. I don't know how many times I've watched a U.S.-Mexico game where Mexico dominates from start to finish, more shots on goal, more shots on target, more possession, more corner kicks, more free kicks, and Tim Howard blocks. He's got 7 saves. U.S. counterattack 1-0. U.S. wins, and then of course, in the event that it's an early 1-0, then Mexico pushes forward, leaves themselves open to the counterattack. Boom, your famous 2-0 that you guys like so much. That is how the U.S. has beaten Mexico in the past. I don't think this U.S. team is built for the counterattack as much as Bruce Arena's first team, like back in the early 2000s, where, they would just soak up the pressure, boom, hit you on the counterattack, and, it was amazing. The way they counterattack teams and beat teams that, if we're being honest, they had no business beating. Simply because they defended very well, and if it was 0-0 in the 90th minute, the other team's tired, letting up. They're like, all right, we got 30 seconds before this game is over. The U.S. continued to push. That's always something the U.S. team has always had. I think over most teams, every team in CONCACAF and most teams that they face on the world stages, they had that attitude of, we're going to not give up until the final whistle blows. And they will go and go and go and go. They have that determination, that attitude that I think is extremely good to have, that mentality for a team. And that never give up attitude. And it reminded me a lot of the Manchester United of Sir Alex Ferguson era, where they could be tied 0-0 and then just score a 93rd minute extra time, added time, injury time goal and win the game. And that kind of thing was it's always been very something I've always really hated about the U.S. team. But if we're being honest, it's something to be admired, because that kind of attitude probably has gotten the U.S. to tournaments and winning games more so than talent alone could ever get them. And it was always a counterattacking style. And that never give up attitude, counterattacking style, and honestly just being more athletic and in better shape than other teams in the past has always served the U.S. team very well. I don't think this team is as built for the counterattack as, say, in the early 2000s, mainly because of players like Bradley who slow the game down and lose possession in the middle. And a lot of people really like DeAndre Yedlin. I think he was atrocious this game. He got beat for speed against that little Venezuelan dude. I forget his name. I think it was number 17 for Venezuela. Beat Yedlin for speed. And if you're a bad defender like Yedlin is, he's a bad defender, and you get beat for speed, your only attribute is speed. It's kind of like Kyle Walker of maybe 5 years ago. Kyle Walker was just super fast. He could get back if he made a mistake and get back on defense because he was faster than you. But if you're gonna lose the ball and then get beat for speed on the defense and get for speed on offense, I mean, what do you have? What are you bringing to the table? DeAndre Yedlin put in one good cross the entire game, and that's like his thing. Like, oh, he's so much better going forward now. And you had one good cross the entire game, and you got beat for speed on defense. Like, you did not do a good job on defense, and you didn't contribute on offense. So what are you doing? Like, what's your existence on this team? Like that's your entire thing. You're fast. That's your thing. That's your shtick. And if that's not what you're doing, and you can't, I don't know. I think he was awful. On the other side, the other kid, I forget his name, Biafana, much better player. Not as fast, but took defenders on, dribbled at defenders, got back defensively, passed and actually completed passes. Didn't just run and then try to cross the ball and kick it behind the goal. I mean, way better player, way better defender, way better going forward. Just a better player overall than Yedlin. And it's no surprise that Tottenham got rid of him because he's not good. He's not good. And everyone's like, oh, he did so well with Newcastle. Yeah, in the Championship. Like, what are you going to do now in the Premier League again? You're going to be exposed like you were last season when you were freaking Sunderland. I mean, he did okay at Sunderland. I'm not going to say he didn't. But, I mean, it was Sunderland. It was a bad team. So when you're a good player on a bad team, I don't know, man. I don't know. I just don't think he's good enough. I don't think he's, I mean, maybe he's, I don't want to say he's good enough for the U.S., but not good enough for, the Premier League. But I think going forward, the U.S. is going to have to find better options. Overall, though, I mean, the U.S. didn't play very well. Either that or Venezuela played better than I was going to give them credit for. I'm not sure which one of those two is true. Maybe both. Maybe the team was way too attack-minded, maybe too top-heavy, and didn't have enough going for it in the midfield and defense. But I think going forward, there's going to have to be some changes. I know I was talking to Anthony, and I know he says the U.S. plays best with two strikers. Maybe against like Guatemala and El Salvador and Martinique, but I don't think it's a viable tactic going forward because you're gonna get outmanned in the midfield, and you're gonna lose possession in the midfield, and eventually it's gonna catch up with you, and it's going to be a detriment to your team, especially when your main midfielder, your captain, can't keep the ball. So that's my assessment of the U.S. team. My prediction is they're going to win a tough game against Trinidad. I think they're going to win easily, though. I mean, I think the final score line, they may have some trouble, but I think in the end, the score is going to be a good 2-0, 3-0, maybe 3-1. Even if it's a 2-1 game, I think maybe Trinidad get a goal at the very last second. I don't foresee the U.S. having problems with Trinidad. And then I think they lose in Mexico. I can't picture. I don't see a scenario where they beat Mexico in Mexico City with the teams that both countries have right now, with the players the teams have. I think from top to bottom, other than keeper, I would say the keeper is definitely the one thing that the U.S. have that is objectively better than Mexico is in keeper. But I think defensive personnel, definitely the midfield, and without question the forwards. Just overall a better team, better players from top to bottom. Pulisic, I don't know if I mean if he plays against Trinidad, I don't know if he's gonna have it in the tank to play again. 3 days later in Mexico City. I don't know. We'll see. But that's my prediction. I think U.S. gets the 3 points against Trinidad, and they lose. So I think they're coming out of this one with 3 points, which, I mean, I think they go into Mexico looking for a tie. I think 4 points out of these two games is a really good result for the U.S. But we'll see. That's my assessment of what the U.S. is going to be doing. Let's talk about Mexico now. So now moving on to El3, Mexico's national team. I watched both warm-up games, friendlies, against the one against Croatia as well as the one against Ireland. And I think they were very informative and educational, because you could see, in Mexico's in the very delicate position of having 3 tournaments this summer. You got World Cup qualifying, which, I mean, it's not going to go throughout the summer. It's happening now and then at the end of the summer. But we have World Cup qualifying, which is crucial. Obviously, you want to make the World Cup. It's your number one priority. You have Gold Cup, which is obviously CONCACAF's pseudo tournament. If you guys have been listening to this thing long enough, you guys know how I feel about the Gold Cup. I think it's garbage. I think it's a farce. But anyway, it's still a tournament, and Mexico still participates. And Mexico still has to win it, because if we want to go on to things like Confederations Cup, the Gold Cup is something that needs to be won. And that's the other thing we're doing. We're participating in Confederations Cup. So we have to make sure we qualify for the World Cup. So by winning, if we win these 2 games, we're in. We pretty much ensure our qualification. Whether it's first place, second place, third place, at that point, at least one of those 3 places is guaranteed if we win both these games. Against Honduras and then against the U.S., both of them at home. In fact, out of our last 5 games, I think we have 5 games left. 4 of them are at home. So we got past the very difficult early stages. I mean, we played in Costa Rica. I think we played in Honduras. Where have we played? We've played away. The toughest ones always away games are Honduras, Costa Rica, and the U.S. Those are the 3 fixtures in World Cup qualifying. Whether it's the hex, the stage that we're in now, or it's the group stages before, no matter what, those are always very difficult away games. And I mean, those are difficult away games not just for us, for anyone. The U.S. has lots of trouble winning away at Costa Rica and Honduras. Costa Rica has a hard time winning away at Honduras, and Honduras has a tough time winning away against Costa Rica. Those are very tough places to play. They have very good home records in terms of not losing. They don't, we may go in and get a point, but that's, it had been a long time since we beat Honduras at Honduras and Costa Rica at Costa Rica, and obviously the U.S. in the U.S. But we've gotten some of the most challenging fixtures out of the way, and we have home games coming up. And I mean, in the way we've been playing, our home form has been very good. The only problem with us playing at home is teams come to Mexico, they come to the Azteca, and they sit back. They play the defensive game. They play to not lose, which, I mean, you can't blame them. You're at 7,000 plus feet. You can't breathe. 25 million people live in the city, so it's polluted. I forget, last time I went, I remember reading the stat. It's something like, I don't remember, like 10 million motor vehicles. And 10 million motor vehicles, that's a lot of exhaust. So you're not only really high up elevation, you're also breathing in, 10 million cars worth of exhaust. So, I mean, obviously, very tough place to play. Very intimidating, 95,000 fans all screaming at you, yelling at you, calling you names, throwing bottles at you. as you know, Central American teams, there's bad blood. There's no question. But I mean that's part of the intimidation. Um, I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying it's part of it. It happens. You know, when Mexico goes to Honduras, when the U.S. goes to Honduras, they get bottles thrown at them as well. So it's not like only Mexican fans are doing this. Um, but anyway, it's part of the intimidation. You're going to the one of the biggest soccer stadiums in the world at elevation. And honestly, right now Mexico's a very good place. Mexico's a very very good place. So they come to defend, I think that's why it's a little tougher for us lately to win at home. We our only draw so far in the tournament, the Hex has been at home against Honduras, and I think it was 0-0. But going back to my original point, we are in the very delicate position of having to play these three different competitions in very close proximity. So we have to win these two games in order to make sure that we can focus on the other two. The other two being Gold Cup and Confed Cup. Obviously, the bigger of the two tournaments, the one that draws the bigger, not prize, but I guess prestige-wise, is Confed Cup. Clearly, obviously. They call it the tune-up to the World Cup. It's not even, no team that has won the Confederations Cup has gone on to win the subsequent World Cup. That's an interesting stat because they always call it the tune-up, and it's such an advantage for these teams to go to Russia and get a feel for the stadiums and for everything. Yet no one who's taken advantage of that the tournament has won the tournament has actually gone on to win the World Cup. Maybe it's not like small teams have ever won the Confed Cup. I mean, Spain has won it before, haven't they? Haven't Brazil won it as well? So I mean, I don't know. It's kind of an interesting thing to talk about, but definitely it's something Mexico want. I mean, the federation want to win this game, the tournament. They're going to make a good showing at least. And so the best team Mexico has is going to Confed Cup with the assumption that those are going to be some of the same players, most of the same players, if not all of the same players that are going to go to Russia, assuming we qualify. We're still not qualified. So I'm talking about Russia as if we're already qualified. We still have to win these two games. We still have to qualify for the actual World Cup. But the assumption is the players that go to Confed Cup are going to go to the World Cup. So this is definitely a good way to really play against quality opposition, assuming most of the teams that are in Confederations Cup are also going to make the World Cup. I mean, I don't think that's a wild assumption to make. I think that's fairly. I would say it's a fair statement. Chile is probably going to be there. I don't have any doubts about that. Germany, Portugal. I don't remember which African country it is, and I don't remember which Asian country it is, but I'm assuming, is it Japan? I don't remember. It's Japan, Korea? I don't remember, to be honest with you. I don't really follow either Africa or Asia as much as I do Europe and South America, and of course us. But, you expect these teams to make it, and Russia. Russia will be there. They're the host. But you expect these teams to make it. You expect to be playing against them at some point, maybe, or at least teams of the same quality caliber as those teams. So I think it's a good opportunity for everyone. Definitely want to send your best players. Hopefully they have a good tournament. Maybe win it, and then, take that success into the World Cup. And then so obviously our best players, all our European-based players are going to go. I guarantee you, all the European-based players, unless they're hurt, are going to go to Russia Confederations Cup. That leaves, so our A team is going to Confederations Cup, no question. Maybe with some B team players in case, to fill out the roster. That's going to leave some B and C team players for the Gold Cup. And the first half of the Croatia game was a lot of those players that are looking to get into that Gold Cup roster. And I have to say, the guys that were question marks did not perform very well. I think most of those guys did not give a good performance. Um, I think even some of our who gave that bad pass for the second goal? I think it was Diego Reyes, who's he's one of our A team defenders, no question. That bad back pass that led to the second goal. He did not make a good impression. I mean, also he's not a right back, but that's neither here nor there. It was still a bad pass. It doesn't matter your position. That's a really bad pass. But he did not have a good game. Second half, you put in your big hitters, and all of a sudden you dominate the rest of the match. Chicharito gets his record breaking goal in a loss, but if you were watching the game, I mean, the first, like, taking nothing away from the kids that were playing for Croatia, because they did not bring their A team either. They were doing similar things to what we're doing. They're testing out. That's what friendlies are for. They're to test out formations, they're to test out tactics, and to try out players to see how players react with other players that are already established, to see if they have a chemistry, to see if they work well together. And to take nothing away from them, they outplayed the Mexican team pretty much from start to finish the first half. Second half, you start bringing in some of our big hitters, and the tables completely turn. And their keeper made some phenomenal saves. Otherwise, it's a romp. I mean, it could have been like 5 or 6 goals in the second half by Mexico. But it didn't end up that way. It ended up 1 goal only. And, a lot of, I don't know, the commentators were like, oh my God, the loss of the blah, blah, blah. And who cares? Honestly, I was also watching in Spanish. And something I've also said on this podcast, watching a Mexico game and listening to Spanish commentating is infuriating, because they expect every game that Mexico play to be a win, and not just a win. Like, if you win 1-0, you underperformed. Like, oh, you should have beaten them by more. And if you score 5 and you win 5-0, then they're like, it's the least you should have done. 5 goals. Are you kidding me? Like, the expectations are way too high. They're way too critical. This wasn't a game that we needed to win. Osorio, the manager, needed to see. He's fielding 2 full teams this summer. 2 full tournaments that he's got to field. 23-man rosters. That's 23 people, and then another 23 people. 46 players that he's got to pick. So 23. I'm assuming it's going to be around 23. I don't know. Maybe it's a little more. But 23 people are going to CONCACAF Cup. Those 23 are basically out of the Gold Cup picture. They're not going to play Gold Cup. I mean, I'm maybe 1 or 2, but the assumption is he's picking 2 completely separate teams for the 2 separate tournaments. So now you have to think that of the 23 players that are going to CONCACAF Cup, those are the very, very best Mexico has. Right? All European players plus the best of the Liga MX players. And then you still have to field another team, and there may be leftovers of the players that get normal, sporadic national team call-ups, maybe 5 or 6. You still have to fill out the rest of the team plus subs. So there's going to be a lot of experimentation on this Gold Cup roster, and he needed this game against Croatia to kind of see who's gonna fill out the extra slots. And it's not. I mean, as a Mexico soccer fan, but also a fan of the sport, you have to say the first half, those players that are going to be making up the Gold Cup squad, not good. They did not play well. They are not up to snuff, and the drop off between, I would say, the very best, our A team. So, and I hate when people say A team, B team, C team, but I mean that's what I'm going to use to compare. The very best we have, our A team, and probably the top half of our B team is really good. And I would not be sad to see any of them on the team, on the starting lineup of any game. I think we have a really good squad. The drop off between some of our better B team players and our C team is incredible. I mean, it's not good. It's not good at all. It's very bad. the gap in quality is monstrous. Um, I was not impressed by very many of those players that I saw that weren't regular starters in Croatia against Croatia in the first half. I think they were poor, and that's just putting it mildly. I think they were bad, and you can tell because the moment you put in the quality players, the game was completely different. And yeah, Croatia made some changes too, but I mean, you'd be foolish to say that that same Croatia team against our A team would have done anything. I mean, we would have ran them over like we did in the second half. I think those players didn't really sell themselves to make it onto the Gold Cup roster. I think the Gold Cup is going to be rough. I did see, going back to the U.S., I did see the U.S. Gold Cup roster. It's not impressive. It's not bad. I'm not saying it's bad. It's got, you have a couple of really good normal, A-team starters, and then, sprinkled in with some experimental players, which I think is, I'll be honest with you, if CONCACAF Cup is going to be the way forward, if the winner of this Gold Cup is going to play the winner of the next Gold Cup, assuming it's a different team, for the right to go to the next Confed Cup in Bahrain or Qatar or whatever desert country, if that's going to be the format going forward forever on CONCACAF, I think it's foolish for the U.S. to field a weak team, because I think they should be going to win this tournament, because it's the perfect time. Mexico is not going to be fielding anything close to the best team, and it would be a walk in the park for the U.S. to win this tournament without threat from Mexico. That's no disrespect to Costa Rica, Honduras, other teams. But, I mean, traditionally, the U.S. is going to win it if Mexico don't. And I go back decades. I mean, before it was called the Gold Cup. It was the last time another team, maybe Canada. Was it Canada 2001? The last team that wasn't called the United States or Mexico that won this tournament? And, I mean, before that, when it was just a CONCACAF championship, yeah, a lot of teams won it, but that was also because it was held in different countries, not just in the U.S. With the U.S. hosting every Gold Cup, playing as the home team every Gold Cup, it's kind of surprising that they don't win it a lot more often. Obviously, the last Gold Cup, they had a horrible tournament, not even making the final. It was the first time, well, anyway. I think with Mexico's C team going and an experimental A/B team for the U.S., I think it opens up the door for Costa Rica to come in and win it, maybe even a Panama or a Honduras, depending. I think this would have been a perfect time for the U.S. to just solidify at least being able to make it to that playoff spot. That's just my opinion, but whatever. USSF has different priorities, I guess, than I do. I guess maybe they're, looking at this as a warm up for the World Cup, assuming they make it. Again, I'm always just in the assumption that the U.S. is going to make it to the World Cup. But anyway, I think it would have been a perfect time for them to experiment, and they're not. Instead, they are going to not experiment, to win it. Instead, they're experimenting. And, I don't think Mexico's going to win the Gold Cup. I don't think there's any chance of it now. I mean, there's a chance of it, but I don't think it's a very good chance. I don't think they're the favorites. And looking at the U.S. roster, I don't even know if they're the favorites anymore. Looking at that Gold Cup roster, it's hard to say. And I mean, there might be surprises because, against Ireland, he, sort of played the best team we have. You saw it was, I think, one of our best games in years. I mean, we played so well, so well. Like the 1-2 touches, the understanding these players have with each other. They've been playing together for almost a decade now. If you go back, so a lot of these players are champions with the U17 back in 2003, I think it was. or 2007. I don't remember which one it was. It was a long time ago. But yeah, I think it was 2007 or maybe 2005. They've been playing with each other for a long time, on the national team, under 17 level, under 20, under 21, Olympics, and growing up together playing with these guys, you have to think this is that golden generation at their very, very best. Gio Dos Santos, Carlos Vela, Chicharito, all those guys, they're in their 20, 27, 28, 29 years old. They are at their prime. And then you have the young guys coming up like Lozano and Corona, who, wow. Like if there is hope for the future in the Mexico team, it is that kid. If he stepped up, if he just was I guess more consistent. I don't know. He scored. He did really well this year for Porto, but I think if he just was a little more consistent, he could easily play on one of the best teams in Europe. He is so good when he wants to be, and he just he turns it on, and it's just like that. He gets the ball. He's on the outside of the box. He does some ridiculous move that should never work, but leaves the Irish defender on his heels and just scores this incredible goal. Just slaloms through two other defenders, put it top corner. It's just unbelievable the talent that this kid has. He's so good. So good, and only 23 years old. So I mean, he's got at least 7 more excellent years. So I mean, I think he's a shoo-in for the Confed and World Cup squads. But what I'm saying is, players like him, coupled with the Velas, the Andres Guardados, those guys that are veterans that are going into their second, third World Cups. It's a really good team. They're playing really well together. I think I think the coming up, other than a handful of other really good talent like Corona, like Chucky Lozano, like maybe Jurgen Damm, Fabian Johnson. I'm not Fabian Johnson. Marco Fabian, Raúl Jimenez. They're not the same caliber as Gio and Hernandez and Vela. They're just like a tier below them. I don't think they're as good. And I think if there's a time when this Mexico team is going to win something, it's got to be now. It's got to be this year, next year. Because after that, I don't think the next World Cup these guys are going to be playing. Or if they're going to be playing, they're going to be playing bit roles. It's up to Jimenez. It's up to Marco Fabian. It's up to Jesus Corona to step up and be the next generation. And aside from Corona, I think there's a gap between the guys that are starting and winning stuff, and that next, I guess not the incumbents, the heir apparents, and I think they need to step up. I really do, because I think this is the chance. Because you remember last World Cup, we were better than Netherlands. We were outplaying the Netherlands the entire game until Arjen Robben dove and changed the course of the game. And even after we went down 2-1, we were still dominating possession, dominating shots, dominating the threat. But, it is what it is. I will never forgive the Netherlands. I used to be a huge Netherlands fan because I like the way they play. I'm officially a hater of the Netherlands. I will never cheer for them again. It's very hard for me to say that I'll never cheer for a team. I can honestly say they're now on my least favorite. When it comes to soccer, I have a couple of countries that I never cheer for. The U.S. is one of them. Brazil is another team. When I was little, I used to love me some Brazil. But then I grew up and I kind of got off the bandwagon just because I don't like things that are overrated and overhyped and just in your face all the time. And Brazil is exactly that. And yeah, they're coming back. They're the old Brazil. And here's the thing. Brazil deserved all the credit in the 90s and early 2000s that they got because they were the epitome of the beautiful game. But then they didn't do that anymore. but their players were still overly hyped and overrated because they're Brazilians. Just for the simple fact of existing and being born in Brazil, automatically people thought they were good. But they haven't been good in a long time, right? They haven't been good in a long time. It's only now, recently, that they're picking back up. You look at CONMEBOL World Cup qualifying, I think they have a 10-point lead over Colombia. It's pretty ridiculous. Going from the last World Cup to now, how much better they've gotten as a team. And I don't know if they have the flair that they used to have back in the 2000s, but at least they're winning games, and they're winning games big. And I would say that they're probably one of the top 5 favorites going into this next World Cup to win it. But back to my point, because of their overratedness, because of how much people just overlove Brazil, it made me not like them. So probably from around the 2002 World Cup till now, I think they've been overrated, overhyped, and I don't like them anymore. I actively cheer against Brazil every chance I get. And you look at the players that are playing in the world. Name me one Brazilian that is the best in his position. You can't say. You used to be able to say, give me a position on the soccer field, and I will name you the Brazilian that is the best at that position. I would say you can't do that anymore. They're not the best strikers. The best strikers in the world are not Brazilian. They're not. They used to even have the best keeper. The defenders are not the best. Midfielders, not the best. And forwards, not the best. They're not the best at anything anymore. But, I mean, that was one of the reasons I stopped liking them, because even though they weren't the best anymore, they're still being sold for like 50 million pounds. And I'm like, who is this kid? And then he ends up being a nobody. We can go down the list of the last decade of huge names coming from Brazil, from Corinthians, from Flamengo, from all these teams that came over here. Went to Europe and flopped. You got Pato. I'm not gonna do it, but there's so many of them. I just think they're really overrated, and I'm tired of the hype. So I actively cheer against Brazil most of the time. So the U.S., Brazil, Argentina. Argentina is one of those teams I just don't like. It's been one of Mexico's. You guys remember 2006 World Cup, eliminated by Argentina. Following that, I think it was an under-20 World Cup, eliminated by Argentina. Then the Olympics, eliminated by Argentina. And then the next World Cup, again eliminated by Argentina. I think it was South Africa. So, for a span of about 5 years, they were the team that always played us and always beat us. And after that, I got a bad taste in my mouth. I don't really care for Argentina very much. Portugal, I've always hated Portugal. I don't like Portugal players. I can name you like my least favorite players, and they're all Portuguese. I hate Pinaldo. Nani, I don't like. Just in general, I don't like Brazilian players because they're overrated, and I don't like Portuguese players because I don't like their attitude. So I don't like Portugal, and now Netherlands. So those are the teams I don't like and I don't cheer for, and in fact I actively cheer against. So it's going to be interesting if the two of those teams match up, my level of dislike for them. But I will say, aside from the Netherlands, which is an honest to goodness, just I hate them now forever. The other teams is just friendly banter competition. That I don't like them anymore. I was actually talking to my friend the other day, listening to JP de la Camera, because it's very hard for me to listen. Like I said earlier, I hate listening to Spanish broadcast Mexico games because they're just. First of all, I don't like their style. I don't like that they read tweets during the game. Like, I don't care about some moron in Connecticut tweeting about the game. I want talk about what's happening on the field. I don't like that. I don't like that in Univision they have like the first half is a group of commentators and then the second half is a completely different group of commentators. I think that's ridiculous. I hate that they have like 3 people in the studio and then 2 people on the field. All you need is 2 people. 2 people, 1 color commentator, 1 play-by-play. It's the way it is. Sometimes you only need even 1 guy. just telling us what's happening on the field. Just my opinion. So I actually switched it over, and I was listening to JP Dellacamera and Kobe Jones. And JP Dellacamera is an imbecile. He knows, first of all, he knows nothing about soccer. Second of all, it's so funny in the Ireland game how he just can't say anything nice about Mexico. When Mexico was completely dominating Ireland, he was just like, "Oh, look how lucky that bounce. Oh, look at that. Oh, that must be. It's just so lucky. Everything's going Mexico. Everything's turning up Millhouse." It's just so ridiculous how he can't. First of all, his ignorance of the sport is appalling. And second of all, how he just can't seem to say anything nice about the team. I think it's hilarious. But anyway, I don't even remember my point. I don't even remember the point of all of that. Oh, right. I was telling my friend how JP Dellacamera is just a moron, and he can't say anything nice about Mexico, even when Mexico is just absolutely thrashing the other team. And he's like, it's a thing that you do. He's part of that old school commentating or generation where Mexico and the United States actually hated each other. And I remember that because, in the early 2000s, probably even all the way to the mid 2000s, when the rivalry was really heated, I hated the U.S. team. And it was a visceral hatred deep down inside from my core, Now it's not so much. Now I look at the players other than Clint Dempsey. I hate him still. Tim Howard, I was never a big fan of personally, but I respect his talent very much. But really, other than that, there's no players left over from that group of people that I just like, just absolutely detest their face. Like if I look at Landon Donovan, I get angry. Just looking at him makes me want to punch something, preferably his face. There's no player on the U.S. team that I feel that way about anymore. I don't like them. I hope they lose every time, but I feel that way about other teams too. I don't. It's more of a rivalry, like a sports thing than an actual emotional thing. So, as much as I do cheer against the U.S. every time they play, I don't hate them. Like I'm not like, oh, I hope he breaks his ankle. Like I really hoped. Every time I watched them, I was like, I hope Landon Donovan breaks his leg in half and can never walk again. Forget play soccer. Walk. I hope he never walks. I hope he has to be on a cane for the rest of his life and arthritis whenever it rains. And I hope he has a miserable life. I hated him. I still do to this very day. But that's different. It's not like that anymore. I don't feel that way. So when I say I cheer against the U.S., I cheer against Portugal and Brazil, I don't actually hate the country. I don't actually hate the players. I just don't like the team, and I cheer against that team. But when it comes to the Netherlands, they're a bunch of cheaters, and Arjen Robben, he's going to retire soon, so maybe I'll feel differently again about them. But that's just how I feel currently, and I really went completely off the deep end there. But wrapping it up, I don't. We play Honduras in Mexico, and I don't think we will. If we beat Honduras in Mexico, it's not going to be by a lot. Because I think Honduras is going to come in and they're going to defend. So, obviously we have the talent to beat them. I think we're a much, much better team than they are. So I expect us to win. But it's going to be close. Because I think they're going to come out to defend. And you know how Honduras play. They play to just disrupt. They're disrupting. Still Central American teams, they come out to disrupt. They're just going to tackle, foul, disrupt the flow of the game. And I can see a 1-0. I can see 2-1 maybe. I would not be surprised at a 0-0, to be honest with you. Just the way they play, they are hard to break down, and I can see us having trouble breaking them down. I think the U.S. comes out differently. The U.S. has never been a team to just park the bus. They've never been a Mourinho team. I don't see them coming in and just parking the bus like Honduras will. So as weird as it is to say, I think the U.S. is a much better team than Honduras, but I think I like my chances against the U.S. better than I do against Honduras because I don't think the U.S. play to disrupt the flow of the game. They don't play to defend and only defend and not come out of the shell at all. I think they're going to come out, and I think they have a little more pride than the Honduran team. I think they're going to come out and try to win. a little bit more. I think they're going to come out a little bit harder than Honduras will. So if I had to only pick one game where Mexico wins, I actually think it's the U.S. game. As weird as that sounds, I think Honduras comes out and pretty much doesn't leave their half, and I think they're going to be hard to break down. But I honestly, if I had to say, I don't see any reason why we don't come out with 6 points. We're much better than Honduras, and right now we're playing really good soccer, really good football, and I think. I mean, you look at the roster that we're bringing. I don't see how we don't win both games. I mean, we have really good players coming out here. Our our attacking players consist of Aquino, who's good, Corona, who's phenomenal, Jürgen Damm, super fast, Gio, obviously one of our more talented creative players, Marco Fabian. I'm still on the fence with him. Jesus Gallardo, he's done well this season in Liga MX. Javier Hernandez, obviously Chicharito, the record breaker. Raul Jimenez, who played really well at the end of the season in Portugal, won them, scored the game-winning goal that ended up winning the title for Benfica. Irving Lozano, who has been really good lately. Oribe Peralta, who's old but consistent, and Carlos Vela, who, when Carlos Vela plays, he brings an extra level to the Mexican team that we sorely, sorely missed last World Cup. I think if he had played last World Cup, we would have done a lot better. I would say, you're going to play with three at the front. You're going to play with Hernandez at the top. I would say maybe Raul Jimenez, depending on who you're playing against. And then you have Corona on the left and Vela on the right, and that trio. It doesn't matter if it's Jimenez, because Jimenez can come in and out, or Chicharito. That is a trio of up top that is dangerous against any team in the world. Those guys, especially Carlos Vela, he attacks players. He's left-footed. He's got a great left foot, and he's creative, and he's not scared to run at players. And then you have Corona, who just doesn't. He plays with no fear. And then a goal scorer in either Jimenez or Hernandez up front. And I mean, that's a really good striking force. And then you pair them up. You put obviously Andres Guardado. He's going to play midfield, and I'm not seeing Jonathan. Yes, never mind. There he is. He did get picked. So you put him. I think Jonathan Dos Santos is. He's one that doesn't get enough credit. I think he's really good. And then you put maybe Hector Herrera, who's really fallen off lately. But you put either him or Layun, and you have a really solid midfield. I think our weakest point right now is the rotation of our defense. I think our best defenders are Diego Reyes, who you have to play side by side with Hector Moreno. I think those are our two best center backs. And sometimes they play Diego Reyes on the right back position, and I don't really like it. Nestor Araujo has been solid, but I just don't think he's... The problem is we don't have a right back. That's the problem. So Diego Reyes ends up playing right back, and he's not a right back. He's a center back. So you end up putting like Nestor Araujo next to Hector Moreno, and it's a solid line. It's a solid back line, but it would be a lot more solid if we had a right back to play, and Diego Reyes could play next to Hector Moreno, because those are our best players in that position. And then you have Carlos Salcedo, who plays left back, which is fine, but I think that is our weak point as well. If I had to, pick, like I said, with the U.S., I think that group is the weak point, and I think that is our weak point as well, because of the players playing out of position, and we don't have a right back, and I don't know. That's just my view of that. But those are my predictions. I think Mexico win both games. Maybe tie Honduras, maybe not. And then I think the U.S. beat TNT and lose to Mexico. I think those are. I mean, I can't see those going any other way, honestly. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this World Cup qualifying preview. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you after the games. Actually, we'll do some Confed Cup preview as well. I'm going to be going team by team, talking about the teams, all the teams going to Confed Cup. So look forward to that.